They say you've changed. Whisper it like a warning. Say it like you betrayed something sacred, like silence is a crime. But what they don't understand is you didn't change. You evolved. You stopped performing, stopped apologizing for taking up space. You stopped turning yourself into a translation for people too lazy to learn your language. You didn't become colder. You just got tired of melting yourself down for people who were never worth the warmth. They only saw the version of you that asked for permission, the version that bent, softened, explained, the one who smiled through discomfort and stayed silent to keep the peace. But that version was a mask, and masks crack. Eventually, you reached a point where being misunderstood became less painful than constantly justifying who you are, so you stopped. You let the silence settle. You stopped filling in the blanks they refused to read for themselves. You realized that clarity doesn't require conversation. It requires boundaries. And now they're uncomfortable. Not because you changed, but because you no longer need their comfort. You no longer play the role they assigned you. And without the script, they don't know what to do with you, but you do. Because for the first time, you're no longer explaining your worth, you're embodying it. They say you're different now, distant, cold, hard to read. But what they call cold is just peace they don't understand. What they call distance is the space you built after years of being talked over, underestimated, and misunderstood. You didn't become colder. You just stopped burning yourself out trying to keep others warm. They don't realize what it took to get here. All the internal battles, the nights you replayed every conversation in your head, wondering if you were the problem or just surrounded by the wrong audience. The exhaustion of always having to explain your tone, your silence, your pauses, like every breath needed justification. And one day you just decided, enough. You stopped translating your soul for people who refused to listen in your language. You stopped shrinking, stopped softening your edges for those who never had the courage to meet you as you are. And that silence, it wasn't bitterness, it was survival. They see the shift and call it change. They think you've become distant, but really you've just become precise. With your energy, with your words, with your time. You no longer correct the misunderstandings. You let people assume what they want, because their perception is no longer your responsibility. And in doing so, you've reclaimed something rare: clarity, peace, control. You didn't change. You just stopped handing out explanations like apologies. They're uncomfortable now, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped doing what made them comfortable. You stopped overthinking every response. You stopped softening your truth to keep theirs from cracking. You stopped diluting yourself just to be digestible. They don't fear who you are. They fear what they can't control. And when you stopped explaining, you took away their script. You no longer participate in the roles they assigned you. You no longer fit inside the version of you they created in their heads. Now they're left with questions. Why did you get so distant? Why aren't you as open as before? What happened to the old you? But the truth is, they were never listening when you tried to answer. They only heard what made them feel good and discarded the rest. So when you stopped explaining, they called it withdrawal. When you set boundaries, they called it attitude. When you went quiet, they called it arrogance. But none of that matters to you anymore, because silence became your sanctuary. It gave you clarity, power, the ability to move through life without the need to be understood. You learned that not everyone deserves access, that not every door needs to stay open, that some people only came close so they could distort your reflection. You're not harder, you're just honest. You're not meaner, you're just done. And that shift, it's not a change, it's your return to self without explanation. They used to know how to push you, a glance, a question, a sarcastic comment disguised as just joking, and you'd explain every time. You'd take the bait, try to clarify, to prove your intentions, to defend who you are. You thought if you just said the right words, maybe they'd see you clearly, maybe they'd respect your heart. But you've learned the truth now. Some people don't misunderstand you by accident. They do it by design, because as long as you're explaining, you're justifying, and as long as you're justifying, they're in control. They get to be the judge, and you're the defendant. They create the narrative, and you're stuck inside it, trying to rewrite the ending, but not anymore. Now when they question you, you don't flinch, you don't react, you don't offer up pieces of yourself for inspection. You let their assumptions sit in silence where they rot without oxygen, and suddenly they're disoriented. You've taken away their favorite game, pulling answers out of you just to twist them. You've stopped participating in conversations that go nowhere. You no longer feed their curiosity when it's rooted in control, not care, and that's what changed the dynamic. Not volume, not attitude, just presence. Still, solid, unapologetic. You don't have to explain what's real anymore. You just have to live it. And you've learned, sometimes silence isn't the absence of words. It's the presence of self. Now they're unsure around you. Every word they say feels heavier. Every glance they throw your way is cautious. And it's not because you became intimidating. It's because they can't read you anymore. You stopped narrating your every move. You stopped giving them the map to your emotions. And in that silence, they got lost. They used to know what to expect. The over-explainer, the peacemaker, the one who filled the space to avoid the tension, the one who made sure everyone felt comfortable, even while you were unraveling inside. But that version of you is gone. You stopped managing other people's feelings at the expense of your own. You stopped softening your edges just to make sure they didn't cut themselves on their own guilt. You realized that if someone can't handle your silence, they were never worthy of your voice. Now, you speak with precision, or not at all. Every word is deliberate. Every pause is power. You no longer explain your mood. You no longer narrate your growth. You no longer offer proof of your peace. Because you finally understand, people who truly see you don't need constant explanation, and those who constantly demand it aren't asking to understand you, they're asking to control you. But that game's over now. You're not proving anything anymore. You're not auditioning for acceptance. You've left the stage, walked out the back door, and now you move in silence, not because you're hiding, but because the real ones already know. If silence became your strength too, subscribe and let the noise chase you. Now you've become the moment they pause before speaking, the shift in tone, the careful glance, not because you demanded it, but because you created it with restraint, with discipline, with the kind of silence that doesn't ask for respect. respect but commands it. They used to mock your intensity, say you were too sensitive, that you took things too personally. And maybe back then you did, maybe you cared too much. But that care, that willingness to explain, to clarify, to make things right, it was never weakness, it was effort. And now that it's gone, they miss it. But they'll never admit that out loud, because they can't control what they can't define. And you've become undefined. You no longer give them the script. You no longer play the role. You've removed the dialogue they used to lean on, and now they're fumbling, trying to re-engage with someone who's rewritten the rules. They miss the version of you that explained everything, the one that filled every silence. But that version bled for their comfort. That version broke to keep the peace. You're not bitter. You're not even angry. You're focused, detached, intentional. You've realized that peace isn't about making everything quiet around you. It's about being unmoved by the noise itself. So now you let them wonder, let them overthink, let them sit in the silence they once ignored. Because this time you're not explaining anything. You're just watching everything realign. Now you've become the moment they pause before speaking. The shift in tone, the careful glance, not because you demanded it, but because you created it. With restraint, with discipline, with the kind of silence that doesn't ask for respect, but commands it. They used to mock your intensity, say you were too sensitive, that you took things too personally. And maybe back then you did, maybe you cared too much. But that care, that willingness to explain, to clarify, to make things right, it was never weakness, it was effort. And now that it's gone, they miss it. But they'll never admit that out loud, because they can't control what they can't define, and you've become undefined. You no longer give them the script. You no longer play the role. You've removed the dialogue they used to lean on, and now they're fumbling, trying to re-engage with someone who's rewritten the rules. They miss the version of you that explained everything, the one that filled every silence. But that version bled for their comfort. That version broke to keep the peace. You're not bitter, you're not even angry, you're focused, detached, intentional. You've realized that peace isn't about making everything quiet around you, it's about being unmoved by the noise itself. So now you let them wonder, let them overthink, let them sit in the silence they once ignored, because this time you're not explaining anything, you're just watching everything realign. You walk in differently now, not with arrogance, but with presence. The kind that settles into a room without asking permission. The kind that shifts the temperature. People feel it before they understand it. They sense the weight in your silence, and they start watching their words. Not because you warned them, but because you didn't. That's the paradox they never saw coming. They expected your power to be loud, visible, maybe even aggressive. But real power isn't a show, it's a standard. And you've become that standard. You stopped offering versions of yourself tailored to their comfort. You no longer adjust your volume to keep others from feeling small. You let them feel it, all of it. The distance, the absence, the lack of access. And that absence now speaks louder than any words ever did. Because what they fear most isn't what you say, it's what you no longer explain. You've become unpredictable, not because you changed, but because they can't predict what they can't influence. And when people lose access to your emotions, they panic. When they can no longer read your tone, they second-guess theirs. You've reclaimed your silence, and in doing so, made it louder than anything they've ever said. Now they watch you the way people watch fire from across the room, drawn to the heat, terrified of the burn. And the truth is, you didn't become dangerous. You just stopped being available. They scroll back through your old messages now, reread the things they once ignored, replay the words they brushed off. Back then, your honesty was too much, your sensitivity dramatic, your presence intense. But now your silence has made those very traits unforgettable. They try to recall what they said, what they did, that made you go quiet. They analyze your last words, hoping to find some clue, but there is none. Because the shift didn't happen in a moment, it happened over time, like water dripping on stone, slow, relentless, final. And when you left, you didn't slam the door, you didn't announce it, you just stopped knocking, you stopped answering, you stopped offering parts of yourself to people who kept throwing them back broken. Now they say they miss you, not because they want to understand, but because they miss the version of you that tried so hard to be understood. That version who gave them chance after chance. That version who explained every look, every pause, every wound. But that version was exhausted. And exhaustion doesn't scream, it disappears. You didn't disappear to punish them. You disappeared to find peace. And in that space, you rebuilt something stronger, not louder, not meaner, just whole. Now they feel your absence like gravity, unseen but impossible to ignore. And while they miss the sound of your voice, you've finally learned to live without needing to hear theirs. Now they call you mysterious, elusive, hard to read. They romanticize the silence they once resented because they don't understand it, and people always want what they can't explain. They try to label you, define you, box you in again, but you no longer fit into definitions written by people who never truly saw you. They say you've become unreachable, but the truth is you just stopped lowering your frequency to match their chaos. You didn't build walls. You just stopped answering doors that only opened when it was convenient for them. Now they admire your distance, the way you move alone, the way your energy is no longer up for public consumption. And what they don't admit is this: they didn't just lose access to your time, they lost access to your light, to your clarity, to the part of you that would have given them the benefit of the doubt twice. They lost someone who tried over and over, and now in your silence, they realize it wasn't weakness. It was grace. It was effort. It was love in its rawest form. And now that it's gone, they can't recreate it, because what you gave wasn't a performance. It was real, and now you don't give pieces of yourself to those who didn't know what to do with the whole. You didn't become cold, you became sacred. And now your silence is no longer an absence. It's a boundary with a backbone. They'll tell the story wrong. They always do. They'll say you grew distant, that you changed, that one day you just stopped caring. They'll say you outgrew the people who loved you. But they won't talk about what came before. The weight, the exhaustion, the slow erosion of your spirit while you kept smiling to keep everyone else comfortable. They won't talk about the apologies you whispered that no one returned, about the hours you spent rewording the truth so it wouldn't sound too sharp. about the endless cycle of giving too much and getting too little. No, those parts won't be in their version, because it's easier to call you cold than to admit they lost something precious, something they didn't know how to hold, something they never thought would leave without slamming the door. But you didn't leave with rage, you left with clarity, and now you're not explaining, you're not defending, you're not adjusting your volume for people committed to staying deaf. You're just gone, not invisible, not hidden, just out of reach. Not because you disappeared, but because you finally arrived. Fully, silently, completely. And those who once required your explanation now live in the echo of everything they never understood.